Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Forum Daily West. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. Mark Carney sworn in as Canada's 24th Prime Minister, along with a much smaller cabinet. Plus, our Foreign Affairs Minister briefs media about private meetings with U.S. Secretary Rubio. And Alberta Health Minister Adrienne LaGrange files statements of defense rejecting allegations of corruption. Thanks so much for joining us. After 9 years, Canada has a new Prime Minister. Mark Carney was officially sworn in as the 24th Prime Minister of Canada this morning, along with his cabinet ministers.
I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely swear that I shall be a true and faithful servant to His Majesty King Charles III, as a member of His Majesty's Privy Council for Canada. Generally, in all things I shall do as a faithful and true servant ought to do for His Majesty. I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Prime Minister.
And one of the first acts Carney did today was cut Canada's consumer carbon tax. People who have received carbon tax rebates will get a final payment for the next quarter in April. The new Liberal government has 24 ministers in all, down from 35, and includes a mix of new faces and ministers from Justin Trudeau's era. Former Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is now Transport and Internal Trade Minister. Other familiar faces include Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly and former Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who takes over the Intergovernmental Affairs portfolio. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre describes the new cabinet as having, quote, a little bit of cosmetic surgery. He says the new government under Prime Minister Mark Carney is nearly identical to that of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Today, Liberals are trying to trick Canadians into electing them for a fourth term in power, with a cabinet that is 87% the same as Trudeau's cabinet. 100% of today's Liberal cabinet were in Justin Trudeau's Liberal caucus. These same Liberal MPs voted to hike the carbon tax, double the debt, double food bank lineups, and double housing costs. The same Liberals all supported blocking pipelines, LNG plants, and passing the anti-energy law C-69 that has made Canada even more reliant on the U.S.
Carney says he's received invitations from the leaders of France and Britain for visits to discuss economic connections and the security of Europe and Canada. Speaking after his swearing-in ceremony in Ottawa today, Carney says he will head to both countries next week, noting diversifying Canada's commercial and trading relationships is critical.
I received an invitation from the President of France to discuss a variety of issues, both economic, commercial, to reinforce those relationships. Also issues related to security in Europe, in Canada. Similar discussions will be had with the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom. This is sensible. Security is a priority for this government, reinforcing our security, as is diversifying our trading and commercial relationships. Of course, with both Europe and the United Kingdom, there are many opportunities. And as I said a moment ago in my remarks, there are historic ties.
Carney says he does not currently have plans to travel to Washington, D.C. to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump, but looks forward to speaking with him over the phone soon. This Saturday, March 15th, Lethbridge Polytechnic will hold its winter open house. This event invites prospective students along with their families and community members to visit the campus and learn about over 60 programs offered at the school. Lethbridge Polytechnic recruiter Tom Virag explains the benefits this event offers to future students.
All of your questions are going to be answered by experts, not generalists. Number one. Number two, in my opinion, the best way to fall in love with the Polytechnic is to actually be here on our campus and try things out and have a sense for what campus life is all about. Students also get a free meal. They also get to take advantage of a 50% off application fees. So instead of $100, they only cost you $50. We do 2 open houses every year. One is in the fall. Winter open house is more focused on the mature learner and folks who are coming from far away. So we have some people registered from all over Alberta and even outside of Alberta as well. We have an online registration process. It takes a couple minutes to register. If someone shows up here without a registration, they will have the option to register in person.
The event takes place this Saturday from 10:30 a.m. until 2 p.m. And speaking of Washington, Canada's ambassador to the U.S., Kirsten Hillman, and ministers Dominic LeBlanc and Francois-Philippe Champagne, along with Ontario Premier Doug Ford, say their meetings with President Trump's team Thursday in Washington, D.C. were constructive. The Canadian officials met with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer, among other economic advisors, as Trump continues his massive tariff agenda.
I'm feeling very positive, and I just look forward to reaching out again next week. But this, I can honestly say, was the best meeting I've ever had coming down here.
We have a better understanding of the frame around the America First economic policy and trade policy they put together. That understanding, I think, is helpful. Obviously, those were private conversations, so we're not going to be standing here, Minister LeBlanc and I, with the ambassador to go into all the details of what we discussed. But I would say that we leave Washington, I think, better equipped in making sure that we can defend Canadian interests. I have had a number, like Dominic and the ambassador, a number of engagement with foreign leaders around the world. I would say this was a constructive discussion. We have our disagreements, but as long as you have dialogue, you're making progress.
We wouldn't presume to tell Premier Ford how to manage issues within the jurisdiction of the Government of Ontario. In our federation, the provinces are sovereign in their own jurisdiction. The Government of Canada, however, is responsible for negotiating international treaties and trade agreements. But the tradition is that the provinces are consulted and are involved with the Government of Canada in ensuring that we're representing the national interest. So that was part of the conversation today, which I thought was quite constructive.
Foreign Affairs Minister Melody Joly says she told U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio that Canada is applying maximum pressure against American tariffs while seeking off-ramps. She says that a long meeting with Rubio on the sidelines of the G7 foreign ministers meeting focused on how Ottawa can collaborate with Washington.
We had a very long conversation, the Secretary and I. I wanted to be able to have a frank conversation with him. Of course, Canada's sovereignty is not up for debate, and we had a long conversation on tariffs and trade. The approach when it comes to a relationship with the U.S., and through my conversation with the Secretary, was we will put maximum pressure on the Americans. And meanwhile, we'll work on finding off-ramps. Because we know ultimately, at the end of the day, the Trump tariffs are going to hurt Americans. And so that's our message, and that's our approach. And meanwhile, I think that on many different issues, what Secretary Rubio and I have been able to agree on was we won't let things that we don't agree on stop us to agree on other things. And that was the essence also of the meeting that was happening here. We know that we're living in a dangerous world. We know that there are so many different issues we need to solve, particularly the issue linked to Ukraine, the Middle East, the rise of China, etc. So that's why I think we were able to actually cover many different issues, but at least be able to say that we will be keeping our relationship and make sure that we continue to talk.
Also out of that G7 meeting, Kaja Kallas, the European Union's foreign policy chief, says Canadians must realize that Russia is an Arctic neighbor that could attempt to grab resources in Canada's far north. She says more defense spending is needed on both sides of the Atlantic to prevent Russia from testing allies' resolve.
If you have the might, then you can go for your neighbors' territories. And we know that Canada is, the Arctic is extremely important to you when it comes to also, trade routes, when it comes to critical raw materials. And when we allow Russia to get away with the land grabs and attacks that they are doing on Ukraine,
Alberta Health Minister Adriana LaGrange has filed a statement of defense to formally reject allegations that the former head of Alberta Health Services was fired for investigating corruption. LaGrange's defense says the former AHS boss Athana Mantzalopoulos was fired because she was incompetent and working to stop mandated health reform. Mantzalopoulos said in her statement of claim last month that her termination was politically motivated. None of the allegations from either side have been tested in court. And Alberta's opposition NDP leader Naheed Nenshi responded by saying, quote, "The government's statement of defense adds more chapters to this endless corrupt care saga. Neither of these nor the lawsuit as a whole give Albertans the answers we need. This is why we demand a full public inquiry now rather than the Premier's shame investigation," end quote. Well, police in Alberta say there could be more victims after 4 assaults that allegedly took place last month at a daycare just west of Edmonton. Mounties say they began receiving complaints last week stemming from Little Stars Montessori Early Learning Center in Spruce Grove that at least 4 victims have since been identified. Parents who have children attending the daycare and believe their child was assaulted are asked to contact RCMP or Crime Stoppers. The Alberta government says it's closely monitoring the daycare and has temporarily restricted it from caring for infants. In an announcement earlier this week, Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides shared details of how Alberta's Budget 2025, if passed, will support enrollment growth and add resources for classrooms.
As we all know, Alberta schools are seeing unprecedented student increase. Since 2020, Alberta schools have welcomed nearly 89,000 new students. While this fast growth is indeed proof of Alberta's strong economy and our welcoming communities, it also presents many challenges for our education system. Today, I'm happy to share that our government will be making a historic $9.8 billion taxpayer investment into education, which represents an increase of $426 million or 4.5% from last year. This historic investment not only supports enrollment growth, but also raises grant rates and puts more money into the classroom by giving school boards the flexibility to make decisions that best serve their students.
Nicolaides adds that 98% of the education budget flows directly to the school boards, who then make the decisions where to put the money. It has been a criticism of the Alberta Teachers Association that Alberta schools are the least funded in all of Canada. Well, not a day goes by that someone's property isn't damaged by an airline. But one southern Alberta woman spent months fighting with Air Canada after her infant carrier was damaged and the airline would not replace the full cost of the car seat unit that clips into her stroller set. She was also advised by Alberta Health Services to not use the car seat since they felt its structural integrity had been compromised. Well, the province of Alberta will be holding municipal elections this coming October, and the town of Coaldale is encouraging residents to verify their voter registration status through Elections Alberta sooner rather than later. Last year, the province made a number of amendments to the Local Authorities Election Act, and one of those amendments is that Alberta municipalities, including Coaldale, are now required to create a permanent list of eligible voters. In previous elections, municipalities could choose to develop one or not, but they no longer have that choice. What this means is that all eligible voters in Coaldale and other towns should ensure they are listed in the provincial register before the election. Voters who are already registered will find their names automatically included on the municipal voters list and won't have to spend extra time at the polls filling out paperwork. Lethbridge police are seeking the public's assistance to locate a 48-year-old man who is wanted on an outstanding property crimes warrant. Richard James Shaw is wanted on a warrant for shoplifting under $5,000. Anyone who has seen Shaw or who has information on his whereabouts is asked to call police at 403-328-4444. Canada's steelmakers are already seeing layoffs and job cuts amid U.S. tariffs. The United Steelworkers Union says about 30 people were let go permanently late last week at the Eastern Ontario steel plant Ivaco.